From toxic edible beans to strawberry-flavored root vegetables to cucumbers that explode when ripe, the Andes Mountains are home to an incredible diversity of food plants, some of which are now familiar as some of the world's most commonly eaten foods. But those familiar ones are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Andean plants, and many of these ones that have spread worldwide from the Americas, like beans, tomatoes, squashes, and ornamental marigolds, also have close relatives from the Andes that haven't spread the same way. Well, one of these has spread, but maybe not in the way we would like. But here let's look at a few of these lesser known food crops from the Andes, including arguably one of the most beautiful crop plants, and in my view, one of the tastiest. Let's start with a legume. Legumes are a humongous group of plants, currently even thought to be the third largest plant family, with some estimates surpassing 20,000 species, tiny herbs, massive trees, and everything in between. Some, like the common bean or lima bean, come from the New World, the Americas. Others, like the soybean, chickpea, and garden pea, come from the Old World, Eurasia, and Africa. This one, its genus spans both, and was actually domesticated in both. You may have grown its relatives in a flower garden before and been told they were toxic, and they are, but sometimes they're also tasty. This is tarwi. So, to gardeners watching, yes, this is a type of lupin, these attractive plants with palmate leaves and bright flowers on a spike in the middle. If you've ever grown lupins, you can tell they're a legume by the bean-like pod that follows the flowers. But before you go reaching to eat those, don't. They are almost certainly toxic, and that will not go well for you, and maybe even your offspring. Even sheep or other grazing animals, not a good idea to add this to their feed. Unless you're specifically growing one of the varieties bred for livestock feed or human use, like the Mediterranean ones sold as lupin beans or lupini beans. Others have been known to cause a host of unpleasant effects, to put it mildly, including even birth defects in people and livestock alike. Some sources even suggest this is where they get their name from, lupin from the Latin for wolf, because these were as dangerous to livestock as wolves were. It's plausible as a theory, but it's unclear if that's actually the origin. A few wild lupins were also used as food by certain indigenous groups in North America, but if you're going to eat those ones wild, you really need to know what you're doing and be absolutely certain you've got the right species, which is not always easy, and that you're processing it right, which can be time-consuming. Case in point, these here, tarwi, are one of the edible lupins, but despite that, they're not really edible until you first leach out some of the bitter toxins in them, alkaloids specifically. To do that, these were traditionally soaked in water for several days, and in some cases as much as a week, in quite a few changes of water, or left in a stream for the running water to leach out those alkaloids. Now that time frame there, you will find varied numbers suggested online, and some cooking guides will say it takes even as little as a day. As far as I could tell, that discrepancy has to do with, well, one, new varieties have been developed in recent years with less of these bitter alkaloids, and two, today there's more standardized varieties. So in the past, levels of these chemicals could vary more from plant to plant, and so maybe you just leach for longer by default to hedge your bets. Hearing that, this sounds like a pretty inconvenient food, and you may wonder, whoever thought to try eating this? Well, the answer to that question is almost always the same. Hungry people. That's who. Necessity is the mother of invention, and so, times of famine, you will do whatever you can to survive. But this one clearly wasn't just a famine food, and people way back in history thought that this was worth raising as a major crop. The earliest remains that have been found of these are dated around 1800 years ago in the Montaro Valley of Peru, so we know that they were domesticated sometime before that. Some have also been found in tombs of the Nazca people and in paintings on ceramics from the Tiwanaku civilization. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any pictures of those particular ceramics, but here's some other Tiwanaku ceramics instead. When the Spanish came in the 1500s, tax records from the time indicate that about 10,000 hectares of tarwi were being grown at the time. It's gone down a lot since, but it's still a significant crop in some parts. Now, if that 10,000 hectare number sounds kind of small compared to just how large the Inca Empire was, it's worth bearing in mind two things. First, much of the land in these mountains is too steep for farming, even with terraces, and two, tarwi was specifically a crop of the higher elevations, more limited in scope than some crops, but important where it did grow. But some scientists are hoping these will spread into other parts of the world as well, and it does look promising. Once the bitter alkaloids are leached out, it's really nutritious. Like other lupins, it's high in protein, around 40% by weight, and pretty close to being a complete protein, covering almost all the essential amino acids. Hence why sometimes you see lupin flour in health food sections now, typically made from one of the Mediterranean lupins. And that feature was incredibly helpful historically. Up high where these grow, diets of those who don't own many llamas or alpacas tended to be limited in their protein, or would have been had it not been for these and for quinoa, which if you put those two together, you get a complete protein. On top of protein, tarwi is also high in oil, which can be used a lot like peanut oil, and also good fatty acids. It's actually around 20% oil by weight, which is similar to soybeans, although these are more cold hardy than soybeans usually are. And once the bitterness is gone, they're pretty tasty, a nice food snack. They're really popular in soups and stews in Peru, and sometimes used as a thickener in sauces, and they're even meaty enough in texture that they're used in place of fish in one type of ceviche. And as the cherry on top, these help other plants grow. They are pioneers. They have strong taproots that can break into hard, tight soil and loosen it up so that other plants can grow there more easily. And like many legumes, its roots house microbes that are able to take atmospheric nitrogen and put it into the soil, fertilizing the soil for you. Because of this, farmers in the past in Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador would rotate these seasonally with other crops like potatoes. People in the Old World actually recognized this with their lupins too. In ancient Rome, for instance, you have Pliny the Elder commenting on how good lupins are for a field's soil. This is why the other main theory on the name lupin doesn't quite make sense. Sometimes you hear the idea that they're called that because these plants were thought to be wolf-like, how they devour the soil's nutrients. Doesn't quite add up. Now, people have experimented with tarwi in other countries as well, but hasn't really gotten big commercially yet. Turns out it has a couple drawbacks. For one, it flowers continuously until it senses the end of the season coming, so you will keep getting more tarwi seeds starting and ripening on the same plant as the season progresses. It can be fine for smaller scale harvesting if you can manually pick the seeds as they ripen, but harder for larger scale commercial growing where it's much more convenient to just have everything ripen at once so you can just go through and mechanically harvest. Also makes it less worth it to grow in a place with shorter seasons where the plant just won't have as much time to start as many beans. And of course, the other drawback is the bitterness. But that's less of an issue because there are mechanical ways to leach that out now, and there are those sweet varieties that are being bred with less of these bitter alkaloids in them. All in all, though, a pretty tasty legume if you process it right, and a promising one for areas with poor soil, so maybe we'll see more of it in the future. I kind of want to try growing this myself, even though our seasons are really short and I probably wouldn't get much produce. Still a really nice looking plant, at least. That said, my garden is currently a bit limited in the space. That said, I do actually have a space that might work for vines. So that makes me wonder if this next one might actually work a bit better. So, this is a fun-looking cucurbit. Cucurbit meaning it's in the cucumber and squash family. This one, again, is a huge family that spans the whole globe. Squashes from the Americas, cucumbers and melons from the Old World. But despite looking like a pointy cucumber, this, the caigua or achocha, is from the Andes. Also looks less cucumber-like if you open it up. Not solid like a cucumber, but almost hollow and a bit drier. So it has less substance, but fortunately still a pretty productive vegetable. And if you trellis them right, you can get about 2.5 kilograms of pods in a square meter growing space. And these are fairly popular in the Andes. Here's the obligatory historical ceramic showing caiguas, another bottle from the Moche people. So how do they taste? I would say the flavor is pretty close to cucumber with a hint of raw green bean. And the texture is kind of like if you had a very thick-skinned cucumber and just hollowed it out. So nothing too crazy, but certainly not a bad vegetable. I actually tried this for the first time when I was in Ecuador a few years before I came to Peru. That was a definite naive tourist moment. I knew almost no Spanish, and I bought these and some fruit from a girl selling produce just on the corner of a street. And I kept trying to leave after buying this stuff, but the girl just kept saying something to me really emphatically and getting more and more frustrated at me. And I just couldn't understand what she meant. And her mom's just sauntering off down the street. It was like a good solid 5 minutes or so before I realized, oh, she was just saying I needed to get the rest of my change. Her mom had just gone off to get some change down the street. I also accidentally bargained a hat from $25 down to $9 without even realizing it or even wanting the hat. Confusing times. Yeah, the foibles of youth. But anyway, at that time in Ecuador, I was told to eat this with a bit of lemon or lime juice and salt on it. So I tried that one with lime. When I was in Peru, I didn't have either of those, so I tried kumquat juice on it, and both ways were quite good. Now, if that idea of fruit juice flavor and salt together sounds weird, it's actually a lot better than you might think. A Mexican friend first actually introduced me to that. He loved getting reactions out of us Canadians when he would pull out an orange and then ask for the salt shaker. Turns out salting fruit is actually pretty common in some areas of the world. It brings out the flavors, the sweetness and the tang, and balances them in a way you wouldn't necessarily expect. It doesn't just taste like salty fruit. So this citrus and salt on the caigua gets you a nice, bright, fresh flavor, but also a bit savory at the same time. Another great way to eat caiguas, because they're hollow, you can also stuff them and roast or fry them. Also a great vegetable for soups and stews and stir fries, and for using the shoots and greens as well as greens. And you can, of course, also pickle the caiguas, much like cucumbers. These are mostly grown small scale in the Andes, but also more recently in Central America, some warmer parts of East and Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa. Especially good for tropical highlands because they like their weather a bit cooler, but also are sensitive to day length, which might mean I wouldn't be able to get them to fruit here. We'll see. May just get leaves. Fun side note with these, though, they're not cucumbers, but they are closely related to the exploding cucumber. Those are also grown as a food, and true to their name, they do explode pretty dramatically as a way of dispersing their seeds. If you are going to eat those ones, though, you eat them well before they get to the exploding point if you want to not choke. I haven't gotten to see those myself, but I will document them more fully if I do. One day, maybe. But speaking of non-cucumbers that are named after cucumbers, this here is a pepino. Pepino is the Spanish word for cucumber, but this ain't a cucumber. It's not even a cucurbit. It's not that obvious looking just at the fruit, but this is actually in the tomato genus, within the nightshade family. You can definitely tell if you look at the plant it comes from, though, especially the flowers. That relationship did actually make me a bit wary of these at first. Most of the nightshade family fruits that I've tasted, to me, kind of had an edge of like raw tomato or raw tomatillo that I just wasn't huge on eating in a fruit straight. Maybe I need to try some of those other fruits again, because that was when I was younger and pickier, and maybe I just didn't have good ones too. But with pepino here, I was pleasantly surprised. To me, it actually tasted a lot like a nice, sweet honeydew melon, even a similar texture, maybe just a bit softer. Understandably, these were fairly popular in history. You have early Spanish chroniclers writing glowingly about them. And before that, again, you have local civilizations depicting them in their ceramics. And you can eat them much like a melon, though they apparently also work well frozen, dried, and canned into preserves and jams and stuff like that. Now, the one book I was reading while I was making this video, The Lost Crops of the Inca, it was written by a panel of researchers back in the 1980s, and they look at a bunch of crops that they think should be more widely known around the world than they were at that point, including tarawi earlier. But they really hype up pepinos, saying it should make a great crop worldwide. It's tasty, aesthetically pleasing, good shelf life, small plant, easy and cheap to grow from cuttings, as much vitamin C as a citrus fruit, high vitamin A, grows well in temperate areas with a long enough growing season, too long for here in the Canadian prairies, unfortunately. But it's been more than 35 years since that book was published, and pepinos are better known now, but not by much. New Zealand, it's really taken off, apparently. Seems to be a good place to grow a lot of Andean crops. And Japan has become a significant importer of pepinos, or at least they were for a while. It's hard to find current numbers on that. Apparently pepinos got pretty expensive there, which is no surprise. Fruit in general is very expensive in Japan. Huge demand, not much farmland. So those places, sure. And the pepino has developed modest popularity in some other parts, but not nearly as much as was predicted here. So why is that? What's not to like about this charming fruit? Well, there's a few possible reasons. Some suggest these fruits need to be sweeter. That confuses me a bit. I mean, I've only had a few, but those ones I had were not lacking in sweetness. Mind, I may have been a bit calorie starved at the time, but the one source I read did give a Brix measurement, which measures sugar content, and it put it around 10 to 12, which is similar to a honeydew. Maybe that was just an unusually good one I tasted. Apparently they can vary a lot, and the best tasting ones, unfortunately, aren't always the best looking ones. Also, though, hot weather can cause lower quality fruits, and overripeness can add an unpleasant flavor to them. Another little downside is that they do bruise pretty easily, so if you're looking for prime display quality pepinos, you're going to have to be more careful with the picking and the shipping. It all adds to the expense. And maybe it's also just that in places where melons like honeydew are already available and cheaper, these just don't stand out as something all that special. Could be a few things. And of course, it could also just be the influence of the chaotic winds of fashion. Definitely recommend it, though, if you get the chance to try it. But I think my favorite thing I tasted in Peru, and this might seem a slightly odd choice, but I think it is my favorite herb from the Americas. Or favorite domesticated one, anyway. There's some really good wild ones. This is huacatay. Gardeners amongst you might recognize from the leaves on this thing. It's actually a type of marigold, but one with minuscule and not very showy flowers, instead grown for its leaves. Now, the names and descriptions for this one confuse me a bit. There seem to be very widely diverging opinions on what it tastes like. In Peru, it's typically called huacatay, but in the Anglosphere, it's often called Peruvian black mint. Black? I'm not sure why. And mint? I'm also not really sure why. Like, maybe I can kind of see it. It's maybe something in the direction of like a catmint or something, a little bit. It's not the main note in the flavors, though. I also found one place comparing it to anise or licorice. I wonder if they just got the wrong plant on that one. It does have a close relative that would fit that description. But then I did see another describing it as a mixture of tarragon, basil, spearmint, and lemon. Even weirder to me, though, in some places it's called Stinking Roger, and on the website Plants for a Future, they only give it 2 out of 5 apples on their edibility scale. I guess some people just don't like nice things? To be fair, though, it can be quite invasive in some areas, not here, fortunately, but I can imagine if you're trying to plant a garden and you can smell a huge mass of it trying to take over, and maybe you're even one of the unfortunate few who get skin reactions from these, yeah, I can see how that would create a pretty negative perception. But I think to me, from all the huacatay I've tasted, the closest description I can think of is actually to compare it to a fruit. Ambarella or June plum. It's this tropical fruit that's hard to find in Canada here, but it's got a nice, tangy, fragrant flavor. Think kind of if you crossed like green apple flavoring with a tangy mango. Rough ballpark. One of my favorite fruits I've ever actually tasted, but unfortunately I think I'm allergic. Right after I tasted it, I got a rash all over my lips that looked like poison ivy, and it's in the poison ivy family. But fortunately, with huacatay here, I can actually still kind of taste ambarella. Not exactly, but to me, pretty close. You got the green apple taste, the tangy mango, and a certain aromatic edge that you can kind of also see if you crush the leaves of a ornamental marigold like this one here. I wonder if that's actually the minty element other people are talking about. Huacatay is a fairly common herb in Peruvian cooking today. It gets used in a lot of dishes. I had it in pachamanca, this traditional roasted meat and vegetable dish. You'll find many restaurants and food stalls there with bottles of a green, creamy huacatay condiment. Ocopa is another big one, a potato dish in a green huacatay sauce. I've enjoyed using them in some non-traditional ways in some salads and rice dishes I've made. Hopefully won't get people too upset that if I say that I really like it on sushi. The essential oil from the plant apparently gets used in ice cream, baked goods, soft drinks, alcohol, tobacco. Couldn't find any specifics on that. Maybe more of a local thing. It goes back a long ways as tea, both hot and cold, as a beverage or as medicine, especially for coughs, stomach problems, and skin infections, which recent research has shown it to have a decent amount of antimicrobial and antifungal activity. These plants I just grew in my closet, but gardeners may be wondering, ornamental marigolds are popular companion plants. What about these? Are these good for growing with other plants? Well, it depends. The roots do put out chemicals that kill nematodes and other pests in the soil, but on the flip side, some of their chemicals can also harm other plants growing nearby, some of which you may not want harmed. Depends which other plant you're growing, though, because traditionally these were grown often as sort of a good weed, one that you just let grow in the field until it's ready to harvest. Kind of a secondary crop in a way, so obviously it does at least grow well with some other plants. However, worth bearing in mind that suppression of nearby plants is part of why it's so invasive in some places. It can easily just throttle out the competition. So take that for what it's worth and be careful. But if you can grow it without risk of invasion, it is a great herb. And if you can't, you can sometimes find it at Latin American grocery stores in a paste form. My only wish with this one was that I knew more ways to use it. If you happen to have ideas or recipes, by all means, I would love to hear it in the comments. Also, let me know if you think my flavor analysis on this is way off base. Believe me, though, I am expecting way more disagreement on my one video I'm working on some Andean root vegetables. Some of those had me questioning whether my taste buds are functioning properly. But anyway, as always, if you enjoyed this and would like to see more, liking, commenting, and subscribing all really helps me out. And if you'd like to support me further, you can find me on Patreon or YouTube memberships. And for more plants, weird and wonderful, mundane and strange, I'll see you in the next one on Ambling with Sam.